Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless. Today we're going to talk about mulligans playing combo decks in high-powered formats like Timeless. Mulliganing is one of the main skill expressions for combo decks in Timeless. A lot of the decision making for these sorts of decks is very front-loaded, where you're making a lot of your really impactful decisions either on turn 1 or turn 0 when you're doing your mulligans. And I feel like something that a lot of people struggle with coming from another different arena formats, things like Standard and Historic, where you don't really have decks like this and you're mostly just keeping fair 7-card hands that can play Magic over a large number of turns, rather than focused hands that can do something in particular. So what I decided to do is record some games and talk through the mulligan decisions in post, really talk about every single thing that goes through my head, because a lot of it is not obvious if you haven't played decks like this in the past. I made a mulligan video about a year ago, which I just rewatched before making this, which is a good video. It does explain how to mulligan for a fair deck, but this deck is quite different, and how to mulligan with the deck is also a great explanation of how to play it. So let's go through our mulligan decisions if it really is that important. So this deck, the Slot Machine, you're probably familiar with it after the Timeless Ladder lately. If you're not, you can watch the most recent video I made on it. I'll put the Mox field for this deck in the video description too, just in case you have not seen it. But we are a very proactive and very degenerate combo deck. We are, in fact, like the most proactive combo deck you could imagine. This deck is pretty much just about show and telling a very fair creature like Atraxa into play way ahead of schedule, which is why this deck is absolutely loaded with just fast mana, cards like Show and Tell and Sorin that cheat, and then the payoffs for that cheating. So we're looking to keep hands that do that and do that well. But before we can think about our hand, because a lot of people here will identify this as a bad hand without thinking that hard, but let's think through everything and take in all the information available to us. There's information available to you in Arena beyond your hand. The first and obvious one is whether or not you're on the play or on the draw. We're on the draw here. The second is your opponent. You also get to see their companion before you start the game, and that is often the biggest tell of what deck they're playing, even if you haven't seen any cards from their deck yet. There's a couple of companions that are very common in Eternal formats. The first is Lurrus, most common by far. Lurrus indicates fair, interactive decks. Lurrus decks are the most interactive decks in the format almost always. In Timeless, that is Mordu energy that's going to be discarding you and interacting with Swords to Plowshares, answering your threat very easily. And also the blue decks mostly play Lurrus, and they will be able to answer your stuff on the stack. So if you see Lurrus, you should count on extra interaction. If you don't see Lurrus, maybe don't play around interaction in game 1. But there's more companions than just Lurrus, right? Giganta is pretty much exclusively played in slow creature decks that don't have discard in them. I have seen discard Mardu with Giganta, like I've even played it myself too, but generally Giganta is slow creature decks. You don't have to worry about discard, and usually not counter spells either. They're usually, green and white decks and red decks that are playing Giganta. Yorion is very uncommon, but that is against slow creature decks, generally not playing counter spells. Kahira, rare, but control mages have played it once or twice in the past, so expect control when you see that. No companion, you can't assume it's combo, but more often than not, it is a combo deck in Timeless when you see no companion. So we're up against media combo deck, and the last thing that you can think about is your actual opponent, their username. I happen to know this guy. This guy is a show and tell player. He usually plays show and tell. In fact, he's such a show and tell player that his Discord profile picture is literally like the old school art for show and tell. That's how much of a show and tell player this is. So I see no companion, I see this guy. He's going to be playing show and tell. Okay, great. So now we can think about his deck. What kind of main deck interaction is show and tell leveraging? Since Ancient Tomb got added to the format, people are trying to go faster and leveraging less main deck interaction, which is great. We don't have things to play around. Notably, the card Show and Tell is obviously pretty bad against them if we are casting it, putting an Atraxa into play, and they're putting an Omniscience into play, and then winning on the spot. However, as a note for Game 1 against Show and Tell, we're not going to keep this hand, but you can keep a hand that forces Show and Tell on turn 1, because you're essentially forcing your opponent to have Omniscience plus an instant speed payoff in hand before they've actually gotten to like brainstorm and go through their deck, which they don't always have, especially like, not in game 1 when they don't know what's up. In game 2 and 3, they can kind of mulligan for it. So let's think about what our hand and what it actually does. This is not a keepable hand. This is a non-starter. This doesn't do anything degenerate compared to what the deck is supposed to do. We do have the ability to make a lot of mana between Dark Ritual, Chrome Mox, Troll, and Ancient Tomb, but this is not what our deck is really capable of doing. Against another combo deck, we do want to force the issue early, so we're going to go ahead and put this back. All right, and then we get our next screenshot here. This was our 6 here, and I looked at this. Let's think about what this can do. We can Thoughtseize our opponent and interact with them, which is great. I like keeping interaction against other combo decks. We in fact have 2 pieces of interaction if we're okay pitching away a card, or if we want to Dark Ritual out the Grief. You're almost never going to Dark Ritual out the Grief in this deck. You're looking to do much more degenerate things with Grief. We have Sorin, Atraxa. These don't do anything by themselves. We do technically have a Surveil, and we're going second, so we'll look at a few cards to try and find Show and Tell for Atraxa or Elenda. But I'm telling you, this deck is consistent enough that I think you can mulligan to 5 cards and pretty consistently like keep some good 5-card hands with this deck. And that's just another thing I want to point out, that combo decks in Timeless, they're all constructed a little bit differently, but they are generally constructed with the ability to mulligan well, especially if you are looking for specific things. Timeless is a format where Necropotence is legal. It's a format where Show and Tell is legal. These are cards that can pull you back into games that you have absolutely no business winning and being in, right? If you mulligan to 3, and that 3 is Dark Ritual, Swamp, Necropotence, you will probably win that game if it doesn't get countered, which is absolutely insane. All right. We built a 5. I forgot to screenshot the 5 before I actually hit keep, but this is what we end up keeping. It is a turn 2 Show and Tell Atraxa into play, which is going to be good enough. Against Show and Tell, I did say it is risky to keep the card Show and Tell, but we're going to go ahead and force the issue here. We're essentially forcing them to have Omniscience in their hand before turn 2, and forcing them to have a payoff, an instant speed payoff, before we get to do anything. And the bottoms here, let's think about our opponent's interaction and what they could do. We can bottom a land, obviously, because we only need 3 lands. And then as for the other bottom, it's either Stock Up or Saint Elenda. And I remember what I did in the game. I think in the game I put Saint Elenda on the bottom. Did I do that? I did. You know, I think this is actually the wrong decision in hindsight. If I'm thinking my opponent is a Show and Tell player, I should keep Saint Elenda. And we might actually want to Show and Tell Elenda into play, because what's really cool is that if I put Elenda into play and then they put Omniscience into play, we can use Elenda's drafted card to blow up the Omniscience. I don't think I thought of that at the time. I thought of Stock Up, and my plan is, okay, I'm going to Show and Tell Atraxa into play, and then I'll use Stock Up to get more gas. But Atraxa is a card that gets a lot of gas anyway. And you know what? If I kept Elenda instead, I would have to put Atraxa back, which is a lot less card advantage. That means, I don't know, actually. What do you guys think? Should we have kept Atraxa or Elenda here? Because we could have kept Show and Tell, Stock Up Elenda, and then that would have been a good play pattern. And you see what I mean about planning your first few turns? You have to front load all of your decisions and have a great idea of what you're doing for the first 3 turns of the game. I know what I'm doing. I'm surveilling, I'm jamming Show and Tell, and I'm stocking up if I kept Elenda. Since I kept Atraxa here, we're just going to get the card advantage off of Atraxa. Another thing to note is if they cast Show and Tell themselves, you want to have something that you can put into play off of it. So yeah, again, Elenda would have been better there, because like if they jam Omniscience off of Show and Tell and don't have an instant speed payoff, we could blow it up. So yeah, I think it's actually a mistake by me now that we're in hindsight. I'm glad I included this one in the video. All right, anyway, it ended up not being traditional Show and Tell. It ended up being the mirror, which is really funny. So he turned 2 Show and Tells his Atraxa into play. I put my Atraxa into play. So I actually got rewarded by making that mistake, because this guy was not on traditional Show and Tell. He was on my deck. So we get to play a mirror match, which is really oddball here. So because we kept this Atraxa, we were able to like dig a million cards deep, and we ended up winning this one. Because in these millions of cards that we drew off the top of our deck, I think we found Sorin Elenda, I Fates Fetters this, and then at that point I have like an Atraxa Elenda, a Vampire, and another Avatar, and you know, I have a million cards in hand. I cast Stock Up. I hit better than him. I didn't record the game, of course. So game 2. How we want to sideboard for the mirror is I like to bring in Leyline of Sanctity and bring out Grief, assuming my opponent is also bringing in their Leyline. Could be flawed thinking for sideboarding the mirror. The deck is brand new and it's going to change pretty quickly, so don't quote me on that long term. All right, here's our 7. Now we know it's the mirror, which is really funny. So one of the things that we want to have in hand is probably an Atraxa, so that if our opponent casts the card Show and Tell, we stay winning, pretty much. I want to draw 5 cards when my opponent casts their Show and Tell, right? If I were to cast this Show and Tell in my hand, I probably lose to my opponent's Atraxa, which is the unfortunate part. Because like if I put Nalenda into play, he puts Atraxa into play. His play is just so much more powerful than mine. He's going to draw all the cards. It's not going to be a good look for me. So, do we want to keep this hand? We do have Troll Reanimate and Leyline of Sanctity to protect us. So if we think Troll can go coast to coast and deal 20 damage to our opponent, then yeah, we can keep the Troll. However, I know my opponent is also trying to mulligan to something like putting an Atraxa into play to gain 7 life a turn, or putting a Lenda into play to Fate's Fetters my Troll. So I know it's not going to be enough to actually kill them, so we go to 6. This is a 6 I decide to keep. Now, this is a 6 that does nothing, right? This is actually the kind of 6 that I would tell people, hey, mulligan this. You're playing a really, really unfair deck. You should be keeping unfair hands, right? However, mirror match. My opponent wants to discard me. They want to discard me really bad. And if they put an Atraxa into play and grab cards off of it, the one card that they're really going to want to cast the same turn that they do that is a discard spell. Like, they want to rip my hand apart. Discard's very good in the mirror match, which is why I said I wasn't sure about like sideboarding out Griefs for ley lines. Maybe I should keep more copies of Grief in. I heard some people say that maybe we could sideboard out the Trolls instead, some amount of Trolls to keep some amount of Grief in. I worry about mana sources at that point, but I do end up keeping this particular one against Luke. Oh, did I mulligan it? Oh, I did. Right. I deliberated over this for a while and I decided not to keep it. So the logic to keep it here is what I just said. You don't have an explosive turn 1 play, but you have redundancy for when your opponent rips your hand apart with discard, right? They're going to discard you and they're going to take your best card, probably Demonic Tutor. And then at that point, we could just stock up on turn 2 and hopefully draw 2 really good cards. Or maybe they're forced to take Reanimate because they have a juicy target in their graveyard. That would be the rationale of keeping this. However, I think the ultimate reason why I did mulligan this in the game was that I wanted to really have like an Atraxa or a Lenda in my hand so that I wouldn't automatically lose the game when he casts Show and Tell, which is fine logic in and of itself. If I really wanted to guarantee that, I guess I could have like DT'd on turn 1, but I'm on the draw here. It's interesting to think about, and like it shows that like these decks are not as straightforward as people make them out to be. If I'm still like questioning my own decisions after I made them and like forgetting what I did because there's 2 good answers. Okay, we're on 5 here. This is one of the 5s of all time. So it's obviously a turn 1 Swornalenda hand, and unfortunately, because it's on 5, I actually like don't have enough cards here once I put the cards back, right? I wanted to keep the land to protect myself, but I only had 1 land and it's Gemstone Caverns. So, unfortunately, if I keep Swornalenda Dark Ritual and I'm using Gemstone Caverns as my mana source, whatever 5th card I keep has to go under the Gemstone Caverns. It ends up being Leyline of Sanctity here, unfortunately for me. And then, very unfortunately for me, here's screenshot of turn 1 of the game, we get discarded here, and we lose our Sorin. At this point, there's nothing we could have done. We already went mulliganing a bunch to fish for as good of a hand as possible. I don't think 4-card hands are going to be better than this most of the time. On the draw, I really don't think we were going to do better going to 4. What kind of 4 beats a discard spell that this doesn't, right? I mean, we could have kept the ley line. We could have done something like kind of unhinged. Like, no, it doesn't make sense. There's no other way to make this keep work. I don't want to go to 4, but I also want to keep the ley line to play, but I need to pitch for my Gemstone Caverns, and if I don't exile a card, it's going to only tap for colorless mana, and oh man, it's just not good, right? Maybe keeping 5. Actually, keeping 5, I could have maybe kept Gemstone Caverns, Leyline, Swornalenda Troll. I put Gemstone Caverns into play without the counter on it, and then I cycled Troll? I didn't think about that at the time. Guys, is that the play? My opponent would be going first, but what I would do is lay on a Sanctity to protect myself, and then don't put this into play early, put it into play turn 1, and then cycle Troll? To get my 2nd mana source, and then I have to draw 3rd mana to play Swornalenda. That is a line I didn't even think of. Wow. Yeah, so you get what I'm saying when I say you have to, like, think out the whole game. Okie dokie. So we got discarded here, unfortunately. And then we just go to game 3. He beats me. He had a good hand. Game 3. First mulligan. This is, like, one of the hands of all time. I just keep it because I'm on the play. If you don't see it because you haven't played stupid Swornalenda decks before, Chrome Mach picks Thoughtseize, Dark Ritual, you got 5 mana, Demonic Tutor for a Lenda, Swornalenda. Yay! And then like we win. Luke. He kept a hand that doesn't have action. He kept a hand that has like stock up and resiliency, and then he just conceded right after this because he couldn't answer the immediate pressure from the turn one Alenda. So on his side, possibly he made a mistake by keeping a hand that didn't have an immediate way to impact the board and resiliency. But again, what if I had a grief and I ripped his hand apart? He would much rather have a stock up in that situation, right? It's interesting either way. So it's interesting to think about, and there's no right answer here. All right, up next, always keep versus ladder players. This is true. Against a random ladder player, no companion, I'm going to cast Dark Ritual, Thoughtseize myself to the Atraxa and then reanimate it. What I really like about these lines that have these 4 specific cards is that we'll actually have a black mana floating, which means we can actually cast more spells if we happen to hit like Thoughtseize off of Atraxa or a Dark Ritual off of Atraxa. So against random ladder players showing no companion, I'm keeping this every single time. The amount of cards Atraxa draws you is crazy, and it totally makes up for like spending 3 cards here to Dark Ritual and Thoughtseize yourself and reanimate it. And they just scoop. Straight up scoop to it. I revealed 10 cards off the top of my library. I don't remember what they were. My opponent just gives up. They were on some sort of Eldrazi deck, so they didn't have like a real answer for Atraxa that could get there in time. Game 2. We're on the draw. We know we're against Eldrazi because my opponent did not play anything, but they did show us this Devourer. So they're on an Eldrazi deck of some sort. It could be a more combo-oriented Eldrazi because they have this card to dig. That's what it ended up being. They ended up playing like Karn or something. Unless I'm thinking of a different player. Alright, this hand's so close, right? So close to turn 1 Sornalinda. So what's neat about Eldrazi is I think it's a very, very, very easy matchup for this deck. It's pretty free. They don't have great ways to answer your threats. The best that they could do is jam a colorless hate piece using their fast mana. So something like a Chalice of the Void if you happen to keep a 1-drop hand, a Thorn of Amethyst, a Disruptor Flute naming Sorin when Sorin is on the stack, a Disruptor Flute naming Show and Tell before you cast it, that sort of stuff. So we do have to mulligan this, but if we had a untapped black source here, this would be like a slam dunk easy keep because against Eldrazi, what you're looking to do is just do something really quick, and then they can't answer your threat once it's in play. We end up mulling to 6, and then I forgot to take a screenshot before I put the card back, but this is what I end up keeping. I end up saying, okay, I'll Troll Reanimate and Thoughtseize my opponent on turn 2. That will surely beat them. Unfortunately for me, my opponent kept Chalice on 1, which I was not expecting. Usually, people don't bring in Chalice on 1 versus this deck. This deck actually plays Chalice on 1 on the sideboard, so I was like totally not expecting it. Usually Disruptor Flute is like what you'll see out of Eldrazi, but yeah, I got by it, and I got absolutely like cooked. Absolutely cooked. Novus agrees. Game 3. We get to be on the play, which is sweet. And like I said, Eldrazi just like can't beat this sort of stuff. You just keep a hand that can put a threat into play on turn 1 or turn 2, and you win. Show and Tell is sweet because like they really don't have a hate card that could shut it down. Like, of course they had Chalice of the Void here. The only way that you can prevent this Show and Tell kill in colorless that I know of is to just play Disruptor Flute, and they'd have to play it in advance before we put the Show and Tell on the stack and name Show and Tell blindly. And I don't think that they're ever going to do that, right? We're on the play, so they're only going to get 1 turn, 1 land drop. So they're going to have a maximum of 2 mana. It's not like I can Thought Knot CRS. So I keep this in like it's just like a free game. You can see like the game went on for a few more turns here. Like we eventually drew Sornalinda and whatever. We have like 4 lands in play. But my opponent was just never able to recover from the card advantage. Like you can see in hand, I have another Show and Tell and another Atraxa. Like I could just keep going all day, literally, even though they played the One Ring to stall for a turn and draw 3 cards. So yeah, keep in mind what your opponent's answers are, and when they don't have answers like this, just jam. All right, up next, we are up against a random ladder player completely in the blind. For this mulligan decision, we have the ability to Show and Tell an Atraxa, or excuse me, an Alenda into play on turn 3, and we could Thoughtseize our opponent. This is not quite good enough. If you really knew what you were up against and knew Thoughtseize would be the key piece that lets you blow through their interaction, you could consider keeping this, but game 1 on the blind, we're going to mulligan, we're going to look for something just a little bit better, because I think we could find it. And we do find something a lot better. We find a turn 1 Atraxa, which we're absolutely going to jam. Interesting pop quiz. What card do you put back here? We want Show and Tell, we want Atraxa, we need Ancient Tomb to cast it, we need Chrome Mox to cast it, we need a blue card to go under Chrome Mox. Sorin or Grief, which card goes back? I decide here that I want to keep the grief in my hand because if I draw another black card as my first draw, because I'm going second, I could actually grief my opponent and clear the way to make sure that the show and tell resolves, and that my opponent doesn't have anything too chunky to put into play. So I went ahead and put Soren on the bottom, and then I actually drew another black card to pitch to grief, another grief. So we had the perfect hand. I got to Thoughtseize my opponent to clear out their potential flare or interaction or a big card they could have put into play off of show and tell. And I just got to jam it. I didn't take another screenshot this game because it tracks drew like 100 cards. Okay, next. Game 2. We're going to be on the play here. This does not have a mana source, otherwise I would keep it. Just like turn 1 Sword and Alinda on the play just wins games. That's simple. Also, if we had a mana source, we could have even griefed again to clear the way. It's good stuff, right? Alright, this is going to be our 5. I forgot to screenshot my 6. Oopsie poopsie. It was bad. But I brought in Chalice here because they're Affinity Gaming, and Chalice on 0 is okay against them. But I don't have room to keep Chalice and also keep other good cards in my hand, so what I believe I end up doing is I put back the Reanimate and the Chalice. The idea being I'm going to try to show the Elenda to get ahead, and then stock up gaming after that to try to find more threats. And we end up in a really, really interesting board state where I cast Show and Tell, my opponent puts Aether's Spellbomb into play, and I'm like, dude, what the hell? Spellbomb solos. Thankfully, this Mox Amber doesn't tap for mana here, so I was able to invoke the Divine the Aether Spellbomb, but like I wanted to shout out the next level attack from my opponent. That's cool. I actually like had to answer that with Elenda, and I might have been cooked if they did have a way to bounce my Elenda. All right, and then I did end up winning this game too by turning the Elenda sideways. Yeah. Game 3. Why are we on game 3? I thought he had an easy game 1. I don't know. So let's think about this one. This is a hand that lets us jam turn 2 Elenda off of Show and Tell, and this is going to be on the draw. And this is a really, really interesting one to think about, whether or not we want to keep this. Because Show and Tell Elenda might not be enough. It's not as strong as Show and Tell Atraxa against a deck like this. We really want to have that powerful card drawing ETB, especially if our stuff can get bounced. And we have a dead Chrome Mox in hand as well, but you shouldn't worry too much about dead cards when you're mulliganing with a deck like this. I do end up deciding that this is more powerful than the average 6, and what I did is I drew a Thoughtseize, which put me at a really interesting junction, right? Because I can, right here, right now, cast Saint Elenda. Put her straight into play. What I would have to do is I Shock and Watery Grave, Chrome Mox pitches Thoughtseize, Dark Ritual, cast Show and Tell with Elenda into play. Problem is that, one, Mulligan, and I could lose to a lot of things, including a stupid Spellbomb. And two, I lose the Thoughtseize. I do not get to Thoughtseize my opponent. I do not get to clear the way. I do not get to take a good card out of their hand. So I decide to Thoughtseize them. Thoughtseize hits a counter spell, which I have to take because they would just counter me next turn. But what's interesting is if I just jammed, I wouldn't get punished. They would have put Kappa into play and tried to race me, but they probably lose the race against Elenda with this Kappa. And then I get soloed by Spellbomb again. So yeah, we get into like real gamer hours over here. I could Show and Tell an Atraxa into play. They can just bounce it over and over again. So you know, I'm drawing a million cards. They have a Kappa Cannoneer. It's just such a cool game, by the way. I wish I recorded it instead of just taking screenshots. But I committed to the screenshots bit. I did get to a point where I could cast Soren Elenda to Faith's Fetters the Emery to stop the Aether Spellbomb loop, because they have this Aether Spellbomb loop with Emery where they can just bounce my creature every single turn and keep growing this Kappa Cannoneer and attack. Which I do that, but I actually still get raced by the Kappa Cannoneer. I think they drew like a Portable Hole to clear my token, like another Spellbomb to bounce something. Like really good draws from my opponent, and like honestly, very cool, very good game, very interesting game from this opponent. This was super sweet. I don't mind losing to this. All right, one more here. This is a disrespect keep. I disrespected my opponent a little bit here. Versus random ladder players, I sometimes keep junk like this. Now, you could use your critical thinking and say, what if you get Thoughtseized? What if you get counterspelled? Don't you have literally nothing? And I would say, yeah, I would have literally nothing, but I kept it anyway. And then I get griefed. We went to game two. It wasn't good. It was a grief followed up by a dark ritual. My opponent got the gamer start. It happens sometimes. All right, we get like the easy bake seven here. You don't have to think about this one. They're a mono black deck, as we saw last game. I actually got griefed twice last game. So 100% a mono black deck, and I only saw black cards out of them, so they're going to be leveraging a lot of discard. So we bring in the ley lines. I want to keep this ley line hand, and we have like the stupid straightforward keep. So we just keep Sorin Alenda, and then like, they scoop turn one. It's life. All right, game three. This is going to be the interesting one, right? Unkeepable, colorless sources, Ancient Tomb is bad. Next, roll to six. Forgot to screenshot the six earlier. It's fine. So I keep this hand. Oh, this is the hand I kept that was resilient to discard. I got confused with my earlier hand. So I keep this hand, not because it's great, but because it's very resilient to discard. If my opponent discards me here, they are kind of forced to take Demonic Tutor so I don't put anything crazy together, but they're also forced to take Reanimate so I don't reanimate a troll ahead of schedule. So I felt like I was in a really good position because I kind of imagined like the play patterns of the first two turns of the game with them discarding me. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm okay if I get discarded here. I can always like DT for something or reanimate something. I'm going to be pretty happy with this. And then what my opponent did is they griefed me for 0 mana and then stole my troll for 1 mana, which was disrespectful. And then they started gaming. Dude, they played a Sorin. They went Ancient Tomb Sorin just to lifelink the troll. Like, holy shit, we're gaming, right? Timeless gaming coming through. And then more griefs hit the stack. And unfortunately, we don't get there. If this last grief didn't hit the stack to steal the Alenda, then we would have had a chance. Like, if they didn't have this last grief, we show and tell or Sorin the Alenda into play. With Faith Fetters this, and then we probably stabilize because we have this really big lifelinker into play. But I drew my ley line. Yeah, that's going to be it. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment saying thank you, Novos, for helping out with this video. And let me know if you learned something about sideboarding and the thought process today.